Good morning. Today we are going to be looking at day 2 of our final exam review. So I'm going to look at these problems. First one says to find the product. Well, if I see the word product, the first thing that I should think about is multiply. So it looks like I'm going to be multiplying a binomial times a binomial. There's a couple different ways that you can go about doing this, and I'm going to show you both ways. The first way that I usually go with is kind of like double distribution, the FOIL method. I'm going to take that 9a times 7a, and I get 63a squared. And then I take the 9a times negative 6, and I get negative 54a. Then you have to do the same thing with that negative 3. Negative 3 times 7a is going to give me negative 21a. Be careful of your sign. That's going to be one of the biggest areas that people make mistakes is with their sign. And then negative 3 times negative 6 is positive 18. Remember, a negative times a negative is going to give you a positive. And then you're going to go ahead and combine your like terms, and you get 63a squared. And if you're a little iffy on your positive and negatives, use your calculator. Negative 54 minus 21 is going to give you negative 75a plus 18. And that is going to be your final answer. A second way to do this is with the box method. So this is method number 2. And I do not care which way you do it on your test. Do the one that is most comfortable with you. So I have a 9a, and I have a minus 3. That's my first binomial. And then my second binomial is 7a and a minus 6. What I've done here is I've just created a box. Let's make that look like a 7a and not a 79. All right, so I'm going to take 9a times 7a and get 63a squared. Negative 3 times 7 is negative 21a. 9 times negative 6 is going to give me negative 54a. Negative 6 times negative 3 is positive 18. And right here is where I have some like terms. So I'm going to go ahead and combine those like terms. I'm going to have 63a squared minus 75a plus 18. And if you notice, I get the exact same answer. All right, let's look at number 2. Number 2, okay, again, I see that word product. And as soon as I see the word product, I want to think of multiplication. I'll tell you right now, the biggest mistake people write is 64x squared plus 25. And I can pretty much guarantee that will be one of the choices on the final, but that is an incorrect choice. That square means that you're taking it times itself, but we're taking that binomial times itself. Don't square the individual terms. So what that really means is you need to rewrite it as x plus 5 times 8x plus 5. And when you do that, 8 times 8 64 x squared, 8x times 5, 40x. Got the same thing right there, 40x. And our last one, 5 times 5, is 25. And I'm left with 64 x squared plus 80x plus 25. This is what we call a perfect square trinomial. And if you are really good, you'll recognize that right there because it's a perfect square because it's something times itself. You can square that first term, 8x squared. If I took 8 times 5, I get 40, and you double it, you get 80x. And then 5 squared gives me the 25. However, if you're not a little bit sure about what I just said, FOIL it out every single time or use that box method. All right, factor. When I see the word factor, I think my answer is going to have parentheses in it. So the first thing I notice on this one is I have 15, 20, 35. All of those numbers are divisible by a 5. And then I also have an x cubed, an x squared, and an x. They all share at least one x. So what I'm really doing is I'm dividing each term by that. 15 divided by 5 is 3, and then I'm going to have that x squared. 20 divided by 5 is 4, and then I'm going to still have that b. Started with 2 x's and I took 1 away, so there's going to be 1x. 35 divided by 5 is 7, and there was 1x, but I took it away. And I cannot go any further than that. That's as far as I can go on this problem. Sometimes you can factor that trinomial a little bit further. Sometimes you cannot. In this case, you cannot. All right, I'm going to kind of show you two methods of doing this one. Here, I'm going to look at that first term. Because what we are really doing is the opposite of FOIL. So right here, we FOILed. Now they're giving us the answer, and we have to turn it into 2 sets of parentheses. So I look at that first term, x squared. Well, the only way I can get x squared is x times x. So I know my first term is correct. Then I'm going to look at my last term, negative 35. Well, for it to be a negative, one has to be positive, one has to be negative. Or negative positive, it doesn't matter which order you put them in. I'm thinking 7 times 5. Because negative 5 times positive 7 is negative 35. Well, now I need to check my outer terms, and I need to check my inner terms. Well, negative 5 times x is negative 5x. X times 7 is 7x. Negative 5x plus 7x is 2x. That matches up. So my answer is x minus 5, x plus 7. If at all in doubt, you can always FOIL that out and double check it. All right. Oh, I said I was going to show you a second method. It's kind of the reverse of the box method. So what you have to do, just make your little box. We have x squared plus 2x plus minus 35. Well, we know we have an x squared right there, and we've got a negative 35 right here. So the only way you can get x times x, or x squared is x times x. Negative 35 could be negative 5, positive 7. That would give you 7x, negative 5x. If you combine your like terms, that would give you 2x. If for some reason you had switched your signs and had a positive and a negative, you would have a negative 2x. You would just know that you needed to switch them. Either way will work. I usually stick with the reverse foiling. All right, on number 5, I've got 4x squared plus 6x minus 4. The one thing I realize right away is, hey, that's even, that's even, that's even. I can factor a 2 out. And when I do that, I'm left with 2x squared plus 3x minus 2. All right, let's do the box method on this one first. So my first term is 2x squared. My last term is negative 2. Well, let's see what I can do with that. To get 2x squared, let's do it in another color. To get 2x squared, I'm going to have a 2x and an x. To get negative 2, well, that's a negative, so one has to be positive and one has to be negative. Let's go with negative 2 and positive 1. All right, that would give me negative 4x. Now let's go back to black. That's going to bother me otherwise. That would give me negative 4x. And that would give me x times 1. Well, if I add those together, I get negative 3x. That doesn't match up. So let's change our signs. Let's make that a positive and that a negative. Let's make that negative a little bit better. So when I do that, 2x times 2 is positive 4x. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. Now 4 plus negative 1 is 3. That matches up. So 2x minus 1, x plus 2. And if I wanted to check that real quick, that's going to give me negative 1x. I'm really checking this a second time. 4x, add them together and you get 3x. So right there is my factored answer. This one is a perfect square. So right there, perfect square. Remember, a perfect square is something times itself. So 3 times 3 gives me 9. And 49 is a perfect square. And they have a minus sign, so it's a difference of perfect squares. And this is perhaps the easiest one to factor. You do a parenthesis, 2 sets of parentheses. And one of the ways that I always tell if something's a perfect square is I notice that there's 2 terms. Everything else usually has 3 terms. This one has 2 terms, and they're separated by a minus sign. You look at that first term, 9x squared, and ask yourself, what is the square root? Oh, it's 3x. And then you do a plus and a minus. And then you ask yourself, well, what's the square root of 49? 7. And That's it. The reason this works out so well is if you were to check that, that's going to give you positive 21x. If you were to check the outer terms, that's going to give you negative 21x. That's 0. That's why there's no middle term there. All right, final answer. Let's circle it. All right, number 7. This one looks like it's starting to get a little bit harder, but we can handle it. Let's do our 2 sets of parentheses. For 4y, actually I'm going to write the word FOIL because I'm going to do the opposite of FOIL. If you want to write down a box, feel free to. I'm going to look at that first term. 4. Well, I know 2 times 2 gives me 4. So I know that first term is done. Then I'm going to look at my last term, 25. 5 times 5 is 25. Then I look at my signs a little bit. I know that that's a plus, so both of my signs have to be the same because the negative times a negative is a positive. But since this is negative, I know both of them have to be negative. So there's my guess. And looks like I have a perfect square trinomial. I'm going to go ahead and check it real quick. That's going to give me negative 10y. Check those outer terms. Negative 10y. Add them together and you get negative 20y. So that checks out. You might see it like this on the answer line. Chances are, since it's the same term twice, they're going to write it with an exponent like this. So then you just want to circle that and go from there. Another axis of symmetry. I've told you this one many times. You have to have that formula memorized. X equals negative b over 2a. A is 3, b is 18, c is negative 13. So x equals negative 18 over 2 times 3, which is going to give me negative 18 over 6, which is negative 3. So x equals negative 3. And remember, that's an equation of a line that is vertical, so we have to have x equals. All right, number 9. This time we're finding the vertex. A vertex is going to be an ordered pair. But we start right here with our x, and that is opposite b over 2a. Well, in this case, a is negative 1, b is 4, c is 4. So I'm going to plug it into that opposite b over 2a. So I'm going to get negative 4. Oops, I should have that x equals. All over 2 times a, which will be 2 times negative 1. And that gives me negative 4 times negative 2, which is 2. That tells me my x-coordinate of my vertex. Now I need to know that y-coordinate. So it's going to be y equals, and I'm going to plug it in 2 spots. Negative 2 squared. Be careful here. It's the 2 that's being squared, not the negative. We don't have parentheses around that negative sign. Plus 4 times 2 plus 4. It's going to give me negative 4 plus 8 plus 4, which is 0. So it looks like my vertex is at 2, 0. All right, on this one, we want to solve it. You can only solve it if they give you an equal sign. There's a couple different ways that we could do it. We could graph it. I don't want to graph it. Or we can try factoring it. I'm going to start that. And I notice I have 4, 8, and negative 12. So I'm going to pull out a 4 because they're all divisible by 4. And when I do that, I'm left with x squared plus 2x minus 3. I can go ahead and divide both sides by 4. 0 divided by 4 is 0. So now I've just got x squared plus 2x minus 3. Let's go ahead and factor that. X times x gives me the x squared. And I have a minus 3. I know one has to be positive. One has to be negative. And if I check that, that gives me 3x. That gives me negative 1x. That gives me 2x. It matches up with my middle term. So I did that correctly. So I know my factoring is good, but I still haven't solved it. Factoring is only half the battle here. In order to solve it, you take that first factor, set it equal to 0. Take my second factor, set it equal to 0. I get x equals negative 3 and x equals 1. So on this one, there's actually a couple different ways that you could do it. I did it with factoring. You could have graphed it, which I would not recommend. You could have also used the quadratic formula. A is 4, B is 8, C is negative 12, and you would have gotten the same answer no matter what. There was one problem I wanted to go back and check real quick. Oh, yep, it was this one right here. Do you notice how I took out that GCF? I forgot to put it back in my answer. You can't do that. You have to remember to put that GCF back in there. So that is why it's always important to go back and check your work, because you might make a small little mistake like that, and you don't want to do that on the final. So number 5, you want to make sure you include that 2 when it says factor completely. All right, hope you enjoyed. If you have questions, please ask.